Hey everyone, welcome to this FPS tutorial. This is Police from the Unity project called EXR, which is a competitive first-person shooter being developed in Unity. I'll have a link to the game's channel in the description so you can check that out. I decided to start a personal channel to make some FPS tutorials on lesser covered topics, so let me know in the comments if you have any specific requests for future topics. And a quick disclaimer, I had to crank up the bitrate on my recording to make the script text more readable, and this made my gameplay footage lag heavily as I don't have the best PC. I do assure you it is in reality very smooth and everything works, but I do apologize for that inconvenience. Alright, fire modes including burst fire. We have a real simple file here. We have our player with a camera attached with a mouse look, weapon attached to that, just a basic sway script. On the player we have a movement script and this weapon fire script. That's what we'll be working with here. And all this does is if you click, it plays an animation on the gun and a shoot sound. Very simple. Now getting into this weapon fire script here, we're using Unity Engine of course and system.collections since we're going to be doing a coroutine. We have our input for the shooting. We have a float for the fire rate, how often the gun can fire. And then we have our shoot sound clip and our weapon animator. I recommend separating your sounds and animations into their own scripts, and I would usually fire off an event from here. So it's totally decoupled. That's how I do it in EXR. But for the sake of the tutorial, we're just going to have everything in here. And then we have a float for our fire timer. Basically, the fire timer increases in time. If it's above the fire rate, then you can shoot, and after you shoot it resets it back to 0, and this just stops it from continuing to increase if it's already well above the fire rate. So if you click and the fire timer is above the fire rate, we can shoot. Calls the shoot function. In the shoot function, that's where we're just playing the animation and the sound and doing a debug.log of bang. Alright, so to handle the fire modes, excuse me, we're going to do an enum. If you're not familiar with enums, I'd recommend pausing, looking at how those work, and coming back. Do a public enum, can't speak, named fire mode, can't type either, with curly brackets. We're going to do semi, burst, auto, separated by commas. You can access these by their name, or you can do it by an index. This would be 0, 1, 2. You can manually assign the index if you want. You can do equals 1, equals 2, 15, whatever. I'm going to keep it at 0 plus, just the default. So an enum, just to show you what that looks like, we're going to create an instance of it here. Serialized field, private, fire mode, the name of the enum. And I'm going to name it underscore fire mode. I'm going to give it a default value of semi, so equals fire mode.semi. Just to show you what that looks like in the inspector. Over here it's going to create a drop-down menu with these values we created. So fire mode here, we can drop it down, burst, auto. It can only be one of these at a time, and this is better than a string. It protects it so it's not prone to typing errors, so that's why we're doing an enum. These two warnings are just because we have variables not being used, so don't worry about that. Those will be gone. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a bool for the shoot input. So do private bool shoot input, default value false. Might seem weird having a bool for the input. It'll just return true if the input's pressed, and false if not, of course. We're going to do a switch statement. If you're not familiar with those, pause, look into those, come back. We're going to do switch fire mode with your curly brackets. So we'll do case fire mode dot auto colon and do a break, and we'll do a case fire mode dot semi colon break. So with a switch, it'll check this reference to the enum. If this is set to auto, you run logic here. If it's semi, it'll run logic here, and the break stops it from continuing if it matches that. So what we're going to do here, if it's auto, our shoot input equals input dot get keyed get key, and we'll do our shoot key there. I cannot type today. Okay. If it's semi, it'll be get key down. So if it's semi, it'll tap fire. If it's auto, you can hold and it'll continue to shoot. Now, for burst, it would be the same thing as semi. Right, they're both going to be tapping. But you'll notice we're repeating code here. Usually that's a good indicator that you could refactor. And that is the case here. So we're going to copy this, get rid of these. Switches have a default you can do. So we'll do default : break. And we'll do get key down there. So if it's auto, it's get key. Anything else, or the default, it's going to be get key down. So that's all we need. And then rather than doing a input.get key down mass 0 here, we're going to do if shoot input. So if it's set to auto, it'll hold and keep shooting. If it's semi or burst, it's going to be when you tap it. We'll test that out real quick. As soon as it recompiles. So it's set to semi by default. So I'm going to hold the mouse. It's going to fire once. Alright, I'm going to change it to burst. Same thing. And auto. Boom. Okay, now we want to be able to cycle through this fire mode with an input, so let's do that. We're going to create a function for this. Private void cycle fire mode. And in our update, good to keep things notated, we're going to do if input.getKeyDown. And oh, we actually need to create the input for this. So we're going to create another key code here. We're going to name this cycle fire mode key. And I'm going to make that V for the default. So if we press the cycle fire mode key, then it's going to run the cycle fire mode function. Now in the cycle fire mode function, like I said, these have an integer or an index attached to them. So we can take whatever it's currently at, really be this one, this fire mode, and we could add 1 to it and it'll go to the next one. So we could do fire mode plus equals 1. Now the problem with that is if we're at auto and we press it, we add 1, it's going to go to an empty fourth state that doesn't exist. It's not going to put it back to the beginning by default. So we only want to add 1 if it's not at the last one, if it's less than 2 in this case, because it's 0, 1, 2. So if it's 0 or 1, we do want to add 1 when we press it. If it's 2 when we press it, we want to go back to 0. So again, we're only going to add 1 if the fire mode is less than 2. And you need to typecast that fire mode into an integer to use its index. Now, for other things, I might create a variable to get the length of this. So no matter how many you add, this will always work. But in this case, I know this isn't going to change. So we're going to keep it with just hard coding it as 2. So if it's less than 2, we add 1. Else, or if it is 2 or greater, we're going to do fire mode equals 0. Put it back to the beginning. So that's going to cycle through it. Now, we could use a ternary or a smart if-else statement to clean this up. Again, if you're not familiar with those, look into it, come back, you'll understand what I'm typing here. So we're going to do fire mode equals, you put a bool here. It's going to check the bool if it's true. You could put 1 value. If it's false, you put another value. So we're going to check if fire mode is less than 2, followed by a question mark. Forgot a parentheses here. So fire mode equals, is that fire mode less than 2? If it is, we're going to do fire mode, we're going to do +1. And you put a colon, and if it's false, we're going to do 0. This is the same thing as this, just a bit cleaner. And since this is only 1 line, we could even do a lambda here. So you do equals, right arrow, put that logic after it, and simple as that. So this does cycle fire mode. Let's test that out real quick. Wait for it to recompile. So now I'm going to press V a bunch of times. It's going to cycle through semi, burst, auto, and back to semi. So tapping V, burst, auto, semi, burst, auto, semi. Perfect. Okay. So now what we want to do is create the burst fire logic. We're going to create a bool. Private bool called bursting, default value false. And for the burst fire logic, we're going to do a coroutine. You don't have to do this, but I think this is just the most straightforward way. You could always, refactor it. So we're going to do a private IEnumerator. We're going to name it burst fire. Coroutines need to return something. So we're going to do a yield, return new, wait for seconds. We'll just put a 1 in there for now. So with this, it'll run logic before, wait for this amount of time, and you can run logic after. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this to fire rate. So if you start the burst coroutine, we're going to wait for the fire rate, and we're going to shoot again. Call that shoot function again. And we're going to do that one more time. So wait for fire rate, shoot, wait for fire rate again, shoot again. Then we're going to wait for that fire rate again and set bursting to false. Now, we are repeating code here, and there is a way to refactor this and just not use a coroutine at all, but this is just the most straightforward way to explain how we're doing this here. Okay, so what we're going to do is when we shoot, we're going to check if we're bursting. So if that fire mode equals with 2 equal signs, fire mode.burst. So we've already shot here. Now we're going to check if we're in burst mode. If we are, we're going to start that coroutine called burst fire. And we're going to set bursting to true. And we don't want to be able to shoot if we're bursting. Otherwise, we could start this coroutine while it's already running. So here, we're going to do and not bursting. Okay? So if our fire rate's right and we're not bursting, we can shoot. And if we're in burst mode, we're going to turn bursting to true so we can no longer shoot. It's going to run this coroutine. It's going to shoot 2 more times. And we're not going to be able to shoot again until this is finished and that bursting is set to false. Now this is basically all the things we'll need to check if we can shoot, and this could get lengthy. So what I would like to do instead of that is create a private bool called can shoot. This needs to return true or false since it's a bool here. So we're going to do return true by default. And if the fire timer is less than the fire rate, we want to return false. Also, if we're bursting, we want to return false. So if either of these are true, can shoot is false. Otherwise, can shoot is true. Then instead of this, we're going to do if can shoot. Okay? Check start burst. Alright, that should be all we need. Let's go and test this out. Go ahead and notate that. Alright, so now we're going to just test all 3 weapon modes, cycle through them with our key. Okay, so we're at semi. I'm holding down the mouse button only once. I'm gonna switch to burst. Look at that. Nice 3-round burst. And auto. Now to go back to burst, I'm gonna spam the fire key. You'll notice if you spam it fast enough, it's kind of like it's firing in full auto. And I like to have a little delay between bursts. So on this last wait for seconds, I'm going to multiply that by 3. I've just found this creates a nice little delay between the bursts there. And I'll go ahead and show you that real quick too. I'm going to switch it to burst again, spam the fire key, and now you can only do it so often. Alright, and there you go. That's burst firing and switching weapon modes. Again, separate your sounds and animations into other scripts. I will also separate your input into another singleton script that just handles input. But the point of the tutorial is just showing, you know, the switching your fire mode and the burst. So yeah, that's all you need.